This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com. Let's talk about some other jobs coming up here. The next big pay-per-view event, of course, in this era is Survivor Series, and it's going to feature all 8-man tag team elimination matches. On top is supposed to be the Hulkamaniacs versus the Natural Disasters. That's not the tag team. It's just Hogan captaining one team, Earthquake captaining another. The Warriors are going to open the show against the Perfect Team. And then, of course, we're going to end in the ultimate match of survival. And Meltzer freestyles in the Observer here that the last match would probably tease Hogan Warrior at WrestleMania. Of course, that would have been a WrestleMania rematch for 7. We know we're on the heels of 6 here, but we know instead we're going to get Sarge and Hogan, and we're going to beat that up here. But what I found most interesting here is not the
was it Meltzer was wrong.
Okay. Tickets for this show, Survivor Series, a pay-per-view, $22, $19, $15, and $9.
Family friendly.
For real.
For real.
It's remarkable. And we should also talk about house show business since we're talking about ticket sales. This is an interesting time in the business, and there's going to be an overarching theme of this show as we cover it. We're coming off the hottest the company perhaps ever was. And now it's not quite there. And people are going to sort of freestyle, whether it's Wade Keller or Dave Meltzer, that they're not exactly going to call Warrior a bust as a draw, but it's disappointing from when Hogan was on top. Here's an example. The company ran their first show at MSG in months on September 21st and drew under 12,000 folks. That's roughly $185,000 gate and what was described in the Observer as a poor show. But by the standards of the day, it's the 4th largest show since WrestleMania. On top, it's Ultimate Warrior and LOD taking on Demolition. If you had to go back and think back to, say, the fall of 1990, do you think Vince was considering the move from Hogan to Warrior to be a bust or flop, a disappointment?
I don't know that at that time that he was really looking at it as a flop per se, because you're looking at if both sides. So let's say, for example, that Hogan and Warrior both weren't drawing, then you would have looked at it as a flop. I think it was an experiment to look at from the point of view of, is there someone else? Is there another attraction that we can get to the point of being as viable as Hulk? And Hulk was still an attraction, and people were still paying to see Hulk. And the argument was made that a lot of people thought, well, shit, it's hard to give Warrior that flunking grade, if you will, when Hogan's still active.
Right.
Because now I've got a choice. The truer test probably would have been take Hogan out of the equation and see how Warrior draws on his own. Given a choice, I think that people preferred Hulk.
Well, they definitely did. And they did run shows like that. And we're going to break down some of the differences here that really stuck out to me. But this is the era, because this is important. You know, for years at this point, you guys had been running not just A and B towns, but A, B, and C towns. You were running 3 shows a night. And Meltzer would freestyle that perhaps you didn't have enough talent to really make that 3rd show profitable. So when you decide to kill the 3rd show and just go to 2 touring shows, you're going to have Hogan on top of one. You're going to have Warrior on top with the other. And now we can see what we've really got. So that's going to result in some folks leaving, some folks being laid off, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, listen, 3 shows, that was probably a tall order to begin with. Do you think 2 was the right way to go with this?
Well, yeah. At the time when they were doing 3, you have to understand too, that those 3rd shows were spot shows where they're running local high school gyms and doing fundraisers of the sort. They weren't major markets. And now you're running kind of an A market and a B market. Maybe that, if you're running New York City as an A market, you may be running, Cleveland, which also is an A market, but you're not going to be running as big of a market. Maybe Indiana. I don't know. Shit, I try to think of like a smaller market. Kansas City
Okay.
would be a B market.
Something else that I want to talk about, because you mentioned it earlier, you brought it up that, hey, here would be the real test of what the drawing capacity was. Meltzer would write, you know what kind of money Hogan means? Compare the California houses. With Hogan, they did 167 grand in Los Angeles, 105,000 in Oakland, and 95,000 in Sacramento. With the exact same crew, but no Hogan, they did 30,000 in Fresno. He's the biggest star in the business in 1990, and it's not close.
No, it wasn't close. Not even remotely. And what had happened is over the years is I think that Hogan's drawing power just got stronger. They weren't tired of him yet. They were getting tired of him and they wanted something new. I just don't think that what we were giving them new is what they wanted.
Meltzer really goes deep on what's going on with the house show business in this area. He says, because the house show gates have been fair for the past few months, Titan is starting to do localized interviews for the major markets. In fact, in this market, which has always been one of Titan's hottest, but the last two houses with Hulk Hogan haven't been anything higher than the previous houses without him. They even ran an angle for the market. Hogan was beating Quake by DQ everywhere, but here they brought out a video camera and, well, they do a whole angle here. And then Hogan does specific localized interviews talking about the last match and the upcoming match, almost like it used to be done. And Meltzer would say, give them credit. When a market they've made a ton of money in starts to struggle, they do the right thing in order to spark it back up. It may not work, but at least they're not just sitting there and letting it slide. The localized promos, that's something I do want to bring up because it's something we used to see a lot on TV and then it felt like it went away. Was there a time when the company was so hot that we felt like we didn't have to, we know something, brother, this Saturday night in the steel cage. And then when it starts to dip, you just adopt it again. Why did Vince move away from it in the first place? Did it make it feel smaller or less than, and not doing those localized promos makes it seem like a bigger deal? Or what's the rationale for pivoting in the first place?
Well, I don't know. We never actually stopped doing localized promos. We changed the way and the format that we did the promos localized because we had an event center, for lack of a better term, and we had someone throwing to comments from everyone. You didn't hear Hulk actually say, well, brother, right here in Fresno at the Fresno Coliseum, I'm going to do this. You had Gene Okerlund say, hey, Fresno, Hulk is coming. Let's go to Hulk and tell us about what you're going to do to Earthquake. Well, brother, right here, Earthquake, you're going to get yours. And it was Hogan's comments were generic, specific to the match.
Right.
The wraparounds, they always were customized. So it was just the way and the style and the format that we did it. And just, kind of went back and looked at maybe it will mean more if the talent are speaking directly to the consumer. And we're talking about, here in Houston, Texas at the Sam Houston Coliseum, and mention people locally from the talent themselves versus the guy in the event center.
Let's talk about this a little more. Meltzer would say the drop off basically started after WrestleMania. When it first took place, there were some that were just labeling it as a post WrestleMania drop off. Traditionally, the period prior to the big show and for the few months after, the live gates show a marked drop off. However, just as traditionally, when the big title changes hands, the first go around for the new champion is usually big business. That didn't occur this year. 2 years previously, when Randy Savage came out of WrestleMania as WWF champion, his matches with Ted DiBiase shocked everyone because they did huge gates nightly until it started fizzling in the latter stages simply because it dragged out maybe a month too long. This year with the Ultimate Warrior, who beforehand figured to be a better drawing champion than Savage, but he turned out nowhere to be close, and his first go-arounds were only decent business. But now summer's over, and whatever post-WrestleMania letdown that there may have been should be long over, but the box office blues are not. And Meltzer does a little freestyling. He says there's many excuses that have been given. It's hard to say what's valid and what's not, but nobody seems to think it's a temporary problem because they don't see anything on the horizon that's going to turn business around. And Meltzer says this problem isn't unique to the company, but they've almost been impervious to this, whereas the NWA had really struggled. And he even freestyles that maybe some of the problem is from pay-per-view. He says at this point, fans have been educated for 3 years that pay-per-views are no longer once in a lifetime spectacular, but in actuality, they're quarterly specials, which climax the storylines. And the house shows seemingly serve a lot less purpose and therefore have less interest. Do you agree with that? Do you think that on some way, with as pay-per-view became more common and more accessible, that perhaps it did hurt your live experiences?
No, I don't. I completely disagree with it. It comes down to the simple rule of, if you promote something that they want to see and that they want to come out and see, they'll come out and see it. And at the time, we didn't have the distraction that would get people off their ass to come out and see it and support it.
He also says the second big problem is the stars. Quote, Titan still has one star who can draw, and he can be counted on to draw, Hulk Hogan. But he says that Hulk is no longer an automatic sellout, even in the largest cities. And he says he maybe really was never an automatic sellout, but the last time at this point he sold an arena out was more than 6 months ago. But he's got a lot of outside commitments until the end of the year, and that's when he can come back and work a full schedule. But until then, they've got to figure something out. And they've seen some major erosion at the box office. And they also wonder, if the Hollywood movies aren't a big hit, could that hurt his drawing ability inside this genre? And that's something I never really thought about. Did you guys think that if we tell you he's the biggest star in the world and we present him as such, then he is? But if we test the waters in the mainstream and it's, well, less than that, does it tarnish him a little bit inside this world?
I don't know. It's funny when you look at the drawing and what draws. And I remember Dusty, when we were going around, and it was the program with Savage and Dusty, mixed tag, Sherry with Savage and Sapphire with Dusty. And I'm in the corner of Randy, and Elizabeth was in the corner of Dusty. And every night, we told this story in the Dusty episode, Dusty would look out, peel the curtain back, and go, "Oh, Pungenhead, last time that I was here, Hogan was on top. We already got more people than they had last time. Oh shit, we tearing it up." And Savage and I would go to the curtain. We'd look through the curtain, and I don't know what the fuck he's looking at, but this is a drizzling fucking shit. And every night we would set that record, and I would get the phone call wherever the hell I was early the next morning. "Congratulations, pal. You set a new record. Lowest house in the history of Waco, Texas," or wherever the fuck it was. But to Dusty, he's looking out there. Last time I was here, Hogan was on top. We done a Leith double. And literally for almost every market, we did set a lot of low records, didn't draw for shit. With the exception, Madison Square Garden, we outdrew Hogan and Earthquake with our match on top. And that was one that, Dusty used to point back to, go back, just check the garden, baby. Just check the garden. And we probably, that's all that counts, baby. The mega MSG, baby, American Dream outdrew Hulk Hogan. Last time they're big. What? How much TV time they put in that Pungenhead? They had the big angle with you. Of course, you part of this too. I'll give you a little bit of credit, not that much because it's American Dream. But baby, we had it all there. And Hogan, all this TV time. Put him out, broke his ribs all inside by the big earthquake. Come in. And then little old American Dream comes on in and outdraw them, if you will. And he hung his hat on that one garden show, because we did. We actually beat him in the garden. But it just was, yeah. It's the attraction. That's all it is.
The other thing that he's going to bring up is that, well, and this is interesting because it's sort of what you were just talking about. Quote, "The folks at Titan will say that this is not only the wrestling business down, but all touring acts that work arenas aren't doing the same business they did in previous years. and he would compare it to Ice Capades and Sesame Street on tour. But he says that at the same time, baseball didn't have any drop off that summer. So perhaps it works both ways. And then came the famous, well, the wrestling business
Wait a
is
minute. Who didn't have a drop off?
baseball in 90. Oh, I see the HJ motion there. He did say that, a lot of people in wrestling are going to use the cycle excuse. And we've heard that as wrestling fans. Oh, the wrestling business is cyclical. And he says maybe that's valid because wrestling had always had its ups and downs. But he says usually it's based on a new technology being formed. Of course, in the 40s and 50s, it was TV, but then it was, through the 50s and 60s, it was through UHF television and et cetera, et cetera. Of course, the advent of cable, we're off to the races. And then maybe freestyle's another possible issue. Maybe the guys are overexposed on television. The idea being that there's more hours of wrestling on TV right now for the WWF than ever before. But if you counted all of the other promotions, there was more wrestling on TV back then. What do you attribute? Why is business down? Why is the Ultimate Warrior perhaps not the draw we hoped he would be?
Again, you can sit there and make excuses all day long. And there are people, old timers in the business, that would tell you, I'll go back to Dory Funk Sr., that if you want a babyface champion to be over, he needs to defeat a strong heel champion. Warrior beat the biggest attraction in the business, the perennial babyface in Hulk Hogan. So to a segment of the audience that was really cheering Hogan, yes, it was a passing of the torch. Yes, it was sprinkling Hulk dust on him. But there was a big part of the audience that was like, nah, fuck him. Hulk's my guy. Whereas had a heel defeated Hulk and then done the transitional champion, and then Warrior ultimately defeated them, it might have been different. But then again, that goddamn new gas station might not have opened too.
Right.
So I think that you can create a lot of excuses, but having both of those guys still on the roster and you compare them, there wasn't a comparison because Hulk was clearly outdrawing and still doing magnificent business, whereas, Warrior in the same position did not.
I'm just fascinated by looking at this, and he even starts to draw parallels, saying, someone remarked to me that the situation of the WWF right now is reminiscent of the NWA around 86, 87, where they're still drawing decent crowds, but one could see they were headed long-term in a bad direction. Quote, they kept recycling the same guys at the top for the long haul without anyone new being allowed to be added to the mix. The heels virtually always lost at the house shows, so there's no actual heat on them. The angles became more far-fetched, and as time went on, the NWA went through Turnomania. So baby faces were heels and heels were faces, which effectively confused everyone. And he says the company hasn't quite reached that state yet, but he does see parallels. Do you see any parallel? Do you think you needed more top guys or more guys to be moved up? I mean, he's freestyling here that a guy like Ted DiBiase, who was a great performer, he had done so many matches where he lost around the country that maybe he wasn't taken as seriously as he would have been just a couple years prior.
Well, I think that, anytime that the more people you have over, the better. And I don't think that the drop off was as big with Randy Savage the year before. I really don't. I think that Randy held his own and worked as champion. Was it as big as Hulk? No, it was not. But I think it was better than Warrior as far as that immediate turn. And that's why I kind of point to a little bit, Randy beat a heel in a tournament, but he beat the top heel really in the company at the time in DiBiase in the tournament to win the championship, and then went right into the program with DiBiase after that. So it was a hot program with a distinctive babyface and heel, and Hulk was out of the picture in the beginning. Hulk came back, in July after Warrior won? So Hulk wasn't really gone that long before he made his return. So it's just, I think you can make excuses all day long, but the bottom line comes down to they want to see Hulk more.
Hey, I want to mention this to you. October 13th. So the day this show is actually airing, you guys actually run a show that night in San Francisco, or maybe that afternoon. There's only 4,500 fans there to see Hogan and Tugboat take on Earthquake and Dino Bravo. And Meltzer says it's the second smallest crowd that Hogan has worked in front of in that area since joining the company in '84. And supposedly it's so bad that Vince McMahon starts going on the road with Hogan, trying to figure out, hey, where'd we go wrong? How can we get some of his drawing power back? And I don't know, that just, to me, stuck out like a sore thumb. Vince making house shows with Hogan. I don't know how to feel about that.
Yeah, I don't know that it was necessarily Hulk or Vince making road trips with Hogan. I think it was just something along the lines of right place, right time, different markets. If Vince had some business there and you have a live event going on as well, then he's going to go to the live event and see that also. You know, Vince always went to the New York markets and went to those live events from Nassau, Meadowlands, the Garden, Hartford, New Haven. You know, Vince would always go to those. And then from time to time, if we had a live event going on and Vince had business in the area, then he would try to plan it around that. So I don't know that it was necessarily, I'm going to go see why Hulk isn't drawing in these markets. It was more of the former.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.